Section 26 of Home Education Series, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 6. Towards a Philosophy of Education by Charlotte Mason. The Basis of National Strength. A Liberal Education from a National Standpoint. 3. Knowledge, Reason, and Rebellion. We have been very busy about education these 60 years or more, diligently digging, pruning, watering. But there is something amiss with our tree of knowledge. Its fruits, both good and evil, are of a mean, crabbed sort, with so little to choose between them that superior persons find it hard to determine which is which. To examine the individual apples would be a long process, but let me take one at a venture. Is it not true that a conviction of irresponsibility characterizes our generation? If this be true, seeing that we all think as we have been brought up to think, our education is at fault. Faulty education is to blame if private property be recklessly injured in broad day, if working men do vital injury to their country thinking to serve their caste, if there be people who love to have it so, as long as their own interests are immune. The melancholy fact is that the people who do damage to private property, to public interest, and to that more delicate asset of a nation, public opinion, are all by way of being educated in their several degrees. All of them can write and speak clearly, think logically, if not sincerely, and exhibit a certain practical ability. It is true that the war has changed much and has brought us a temporary salvation, but education must secure to us our gains, or the last state of the nation may be worse than the first. No doubt we are better and not worse than our forefathers, and where we err, it is through ignorance. Through ignorance ye did it, was said of the worst crime that men have done, and that appalling offense was wrought for no worse reason than because it is the habit of more or less lettered ignorance to follow specious arguments to logical conclusions. The sapient East knows all about it. Lady Lugard tells us how. The Copts have a saying that in the beginning when God created things, he added to everything its second. I go to Syria, said reason. I go with you, said rebellion. We need not follow the other pairs that went forth, but still reason is apt to be accompanied by rebellion when it sets out in search of a logical issue. For it is a fatal error to think that reason can take the place of knowledge, that reason is infallible, that reasonable conclusions are of a necessity right conclusions. Reason is a man's servant, not his master, and behaves like a good and faithful servant, a sort of Caleb Palderstone, ready to lie royally in his master's behoof, and bring logical demonstration of any premise which the will chooses to entertain. But the will is the man, the will chooses, and the man must know if the will is to make just and discriminating decisions. This is what Shakespeare, as great a philosopher as a poet, set himself to teach us, line upon line, precept upon precept. His Leontes, Othello, Lear, Prospero, Brutus, preach on the one text, that a man's reason brings certain infallible proofs of any notions he has willfully chosen to take up. There is no escape for us, no shortcut. Art is long, especially the art of living. In the days when the working man represented only the unit of his family, he picked up enough knowledge to go on with at church and chapel, by scrutinizing his neighbor's doings in the village parliament, held at pump or public from the weekly news sheet. But we have changed all that. Bodies of working men have learned by means of union to act with momentum which may be paralyzing or propelling according to whether the men have or have not knowledge. Without knowledge, Reason carries a man into the wilderness and rebellion joins company. The man is not to be blamed. It is a glorious thing to perceive your mind, your reasoning power, acting of its own accord as if it were, and producing argument after argument in support of any initial notion. How is a man to be persuaded when he wakes up to this tremendous power he has of involuntary reasoning? That his conclusions are not necessarily right, but rather that he who reasons without knowledge is like a child playing with edged tools. Following his reason, he acquires this and the other sort of freedom. But is it not written? Nor yet, grave this upon thy heart, if spiritual things be lost through apathy or scorn or fear, shalt thou thy humbler franchises support, however hardly won or justly dear. If, then, the manners and the destinies of men are shaped by knowledge, it may be well to inquire further into the nature of that evasive entity. Matthew Arnold helps us by offering a threefold classification which appeals to common sense: knowledge of God, knowledge of men, and knowledge of the natural world, or, as we should say, divinity, the humanities, and science. But I think we may go further and say that letters, if not, as I said before, the main content of knowledge, constitute anyway the container, the wrought salver, the exquisite vase, even the alabaster box to hold the ointment. If a man cannot think without words, if he who thinks with words will certainly express his thoughts, what of the monosyllabic habit that is falling upon men of all classes? The chatter of many women and some men does not count, for thought is the last thing it is meant to express. The Greeks believed that a training in the use and power of words was the chief part of education, recognizing that if the thought fathers the word, so does the word in turn father the thought. They concerned themselves with no language, ancient or modern, save their own, but of that they acquired a consummate appreciation. With the words came the great thoughts, expressed in whatever way the emergencies of the state called for, in wise laws, victorious battles, glorious temples, sculpture, drama. For great thoughts anticipate great works, and these come only to people conversant with the great thoughts that have been written and said. In what strength did the youngest and greatest of our premiers bring about the revival of England? He was fortified by illimitable reading, by a present sense of 1,000 impossibilities that had been brought to pass, of 1,000 things so wisely said that wise action was the necessary outcome. To say that we as a nation are suffering from our contemptuous depreciation of knowledge is to say that we scorned letters, the proper vehicle of all knowledge. Let us glance at the three departments of knowledge to see in regard to which, of the three, we are most in error. Some of us are content with such knowledge of divinity as is to be picked up from the weekly sermon heard in church. But even with the qualification of a degree in arts, I wonder, do our divines lift us as much as they might into that serene region where words fitly spoken beget thoughts of peace and holy purpose? That worship is the main end of our church services is a sublime ideal, but the way without which there is no going, the truth without which there is no knowing, the life without which there is no living, must needs be set before us in words that burn, and we wait for preachers like those of a bygone day, whose pulpit thunders shook a nation's soul. It is possible that the church may err in keeping us underfed upon that knowledge, which is life, but she does not send us away empty. We get some little share, too, of literature, poetry, history. A phrase, a line, lights up a day for us. To read of Charles Fox's having said, "Poetry's everything," of that black conqueror of the Sudan who said, "Without learning life would have neither pleasure nor savor." These things do us good. We cannot tell why. But there is a region of apparent sterility in our intellectual life. Science says of literature, "I'll none of it." And science is the preoccupation of our age. Whatever we study must be divested to the bone, and the principle of life goes with the flesh we strip away. History expires in the process. Poetry cannot come to birth. Religion faints. We sit down to the dry bones of science and say, "Here is knowledge, all the knowledge there is to know." I think that is very wonderful, a little girl wrote in an examination paper, after trying to explain why a leaf is green. That little girl had found the principle, admiration, wonder, which makes science vital. And without wonder, her highest value is not spiritual, but utilitarian. A man might as well collect matchboxes, like those charming people in one of Anatole France's novels. As such, for diatoma, unless the wonder of the world be ever fresh before his eyes. In the 18th century, science was alive, quick with emotion, and therefore it found expression in literature. Still, a Lister, a Pasteur moves us, and we feel that in one department of science anyway, men stirred by the passion of humanity, letters at the fountainhead, are doing monumental work. But for the most part, science as she is taught leaves us cold. The utility of scientific discoveries does not appeal to the best that is in us, though it makes a pretty urgent and general appeal to our lower avidities. But the fault is not in science, that mode of revelation which is granted to our generation, may we reverently say, but in our presentation of it, by means of facts and figures and demonstrations that mean no more to the general audience than the point demonstrated, never showing the wonder and magnificent reach of the law unfolded. The Hebrew poet who taught us that bread corn is bruised because his God doth instruct him and doth teach him glorified life. Coleridge has revealed the innermost secret, whether of science or literature. Speaking on the genesis of an idea, he says, "When the idea of nature, presented to chosen minds by a higher power than nature herself, etc. The man who would write for us about the true inwardness of wireless telegraphy say, how truly it was a discovery, a revealing of that which was there and had been there all along, might make our hearts burn within us. No doubt there are many scientific men who are also men of letters, and some scientific works as inspiring as great poems. But science is waiting for its literature, and though we cannot live in shameful ignorance, and must get what we can out of the sources open to us, science as it is too commonly taught tends to leave us crude in thought and hard and narrow in judgment. We are told that in times of great upheaval, it profits not to cast blame on this or that section of the community, that we are all to blame even for the offenses of individuals, and we partly believe it because our fathers have told us. Thus did the prophets humble themselves before God, and bemoaned each his exceeding great sin and the sin of his people. We too are meek under chastisements, but we are vague and, to that extent, insincere. Perhaps our duty is to give serious thought to the problems of our national life. Then we may come to realize that man does not live by bread alone. We may perceive that bread, or cake, is our sole and final offer to all persons of all classes, that we are losing our sense of any values excepting money values, that our young men no longer see visions and are attracted to a career in proportion as there's money in it. Nothing can come out of nothing, and if we bring up the children of the nation on sordid hopes and low ambitions, need we be surprised that every man plays for his own hand? We recognize now and then, when the shoe pinches, that the nation is in the throes of a revolution, but we do take trouble to find out the cause of industrial unrest and the correct attitude of the public towards that unrest. The revolution which is in progress may, it seems to me, develop on either of two lines. The men may get those humbler franchises they covet, but at the loss of spiritual things, such as the character of fair play, straight dealing, and loyalty to contract, which we like to think of as distinctively English. But what about the warning that these humbler franchises will be likewise lost? Trade unionism is no new thing. Centuries ago, and for centuries as we know, England and Europe were under the dominion of those states within the state, the trades guilds. At this distance of time, we can afford to admire these for the spiritual things to which they held fast, their religious organization, the thorough training they afforded to their apprentices, and the obligation every member of a guild was under to use just weights and measures and to turn out first-rate work of whatever kind. But, notwithstanding these moral safeguards, the tyranny of the guilds became insupportable, and they disappeared into the limbo of things no longer serviceable. Could any dream of socialism again offer more perfect conditions than did the Russian village communes? But these too established a tyranny which was felt to be more oppressive than serfdom itself. The mere disappeared, lost in that Gehenna which engulfed the guilds. Wordsworth's prophetic lines should instruct us, however hardly won or justly dear. Those humbler franchises for which men are standing out in their tens of thousands with unanimity, courage, devotion to a cause justified by their reason, they will not be able to support those same franchises if spiritual things, the real things of life, be lost in gaining them. Therefore, we may predict that the present movement may well issue in worse things, but will not issue in the triumph of either trade unionism or syndicalism. Here is our opportunity. We blame the workmen for their irresponsible action, for what seems to us the reckless way in which the poorest are impoverished, and multitudes of workers are compelled to unwilling idleness. But those of us who are neither miners nor owners may not allow ourselves irresponsible thought or speech, and we may contribute our quota towards appeasement. It is within everybody's province to influence public opinion, if it be only the opinion of 2 or 3. We may raise the whole question to a higher plane, the plane of those spiritual things, duty, responsibility, brotherly love towards all men, which makes the final appeal. We could not, and we need not try to, obstruct the revolution of which we are vaguely conscious, but we may help to make it a turn of the wheel, which shall bring us out of the darkness of a Simplon tunnel into the light and glory of a Lombard plain. We may, respecting the claims of working men, perceive that they demand too little, and that the things they demand are not those which matter. Even the shock of a revolution is not too high a price for an experience which should convince us that knowledge is the basis of a nation's strength. End of section 26. Section 27 of Home Education Series, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 6, Towards a Philosophy of Education, by Charlotte Mason. The Basis of National Strength, a Liberal Education from a National Standpoint 4. New and Old Conceptions of Knowledge. I have so far advanced that knowledge is undefined and probably indefinable. That is a state out of which persons may pass and into which they may return, but never a store upon which they may draw. That knowledge hunger is as universal as bread hunger. That our best provision for conveying knowledge is marvelously successful with the best men, but rather futile with the second best. That persons whose education has not enriched them with knowledge store up information, statistics, and other facts upon which they use their reasoning powers. that the attempt to reason without knowledge is disastrous, and that during the present distress, England is, for various economical reasons, in a condition of intellectual inanition consequent upon a failure in her food supply. In this case, the supply of food proper for the mind. I have glanced at knowledge under the three headings suggested by one who speaks with authority, and have contended that, even if the knowledge be divisible, the vehicle by which it is carried is one and indivisible, and that it is generally impossible for the mind to receive knowledge except through the channel of letters. But the medieval mind had, as we know, a more satisfactory conception of knowledge than we have arrived at. Knowledge is for us a thing of shreds and patches, knowledge of this and of that, with yawning gaps between. The scholastic medieval mind, probably working on the scattered hints which the scriptures offer, worked out a sublime Philosophica della Religione Catalytica, pictured, for example, in the great fresco painted by Simone Memmi and Taddeo Gaddi, which Ruskin has taught us to know, and implied in The Adoration of the Lamb, painted by the two Van Eycks. In the first picture we get a Pentecostal descent, first upon the cardinal virtues and the Christian graces, then upon prophets and apostles, and below these, upon the seven liberal arts represented each by its captain figure, Cicero, Aristotle, Zoroaster, etc., none of them Christian, not one of them a Hebrew. Here we get the magnificent idea that all knowledge, undebased, comes from above and is conveyed to minds which are, as Coleridge says, previously prepared to receive it, and further, that it comes to a mind so prepared, without question as to whether it be the mind of pagan or Christian, a truly liberal Catholic idea, it seems to me, corresponding marvelously with the facts of life. As sublime and even more explicit is the Promethean fable, which informed the Greek mind. With the sense of a sudden plunge, we come down to our own random and ineffectual notions, and are tempted to cry with Wordsworth, "Great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn," and know that a God had brought gifts of knowledge to men at awful cost, than to sit serene in the vague belief that knowledge arrives in incoherent particles, no one knows how and no one knows whence, or that it is self-generated in a man here and there who gets out of himself new insight into the motions of mind and heart, a new perception of the laws of life, the hint of a new amelioration in the condition of men. Because the notion that we entertain of knowledge as being heterogeneous lies at the root of our heterogeneous theories of education, it may be as well to quote a passage from Ruskin's description of that picture in the chapel of the Church of Santa Maria Novella, to which I have referred. On this side and the opposite side of the chapel are represented by Simon Memmi's hand, the teaching power of the Spirit of God, and the saving power of the Christ of God in the world, according to the understanding of Florence in his time. We will take the side of intellect first. Beneath the pouring forth of the Holy Spirit in the point of the arch, beneath are the three evangelical virtues. Without these, says Florence, you can have no science. Without love, faith, and hope, no intelligence. Under these are the four cardinal virtues: temperance, prudence, justice, fortitude. Under these are the great prophets and apostles. Under the line of prophets, as powers summoned by their voices, are the mythic figures of the seven theological or spiritual, and the seven geological or natural sciences, and under the feet of each of them, the figure of its captain teacher to the world. Mornings in Florence. That is, the Florentines of the Middle Ages believed in the teaching power of the Spirit of God, believed not only that the seven liberal arts were fully under the direct outpouring of the Holy Ghost, but that every fruitful idea, every original conception, be it in geometry or grammar or music, was directly derived from a divine source. Whether we receive it or not, and the scriptures abundantly support such a theory regarding the occurrence of knowledge, we cannot fail to perceive that here we have a harmonious and ennobling scheme of education and philosophy. It is a pity that the exigencies of his immediate work prevented Ruskin from inquiring further into the origin, the final source of knowledge. But we may continue the inquiry for ourselves. In The Teaching Power of the Spirit of God, we have a pregnant and inspiring phrase. Supposing that we accept this medieval philosophy tentatively for present relief, what would be our gains? First, the enormous relief afforded by a sense of unity of purpose, of progressive evolution, in the education of the race. It induces great ease of mind to think that knowledge is dealt out to us according to our preparedness and according to our needs, that God whispers in the ear of the man who is ready in order that he may be the vehicle to carry the new knowledge to the rest of us. God has a few of us whom he whispers in the ear. Abt Vogler is made to say, and another poet causes his explorer to cry, God chose me for his whisper, and I've found it, and it's yours. Next, that knowledge in this light is no longer sacred and secular, great and trivial, practical and theoretical. All knowledge, dealt out to us in such portions as we are ready for, is sacred. Knowledge is perhaps a beautiful whole, a great unity, embracing God and man and the universe, but having many parts which are not comparable with one another in the sense of less or more, because all are necessary and each has its functions. Next, we perceive that knowledge and the mind of man are to each other as are air and the lungs. The mind lives by means of knowledge, stagnates, faints, perishes, deprived of this necessary atmosphere. That it is not for a man to choose. I will learn this or that, the rest is not my concern. Still less is it for parent or schoolmaster to limit a child to less than he can get at of the whole field of knowledge. For in the domain of mind at least, as much as in that of morals or religion, man is under a divine master. He has to know as he has to eat. That there is not one period of life, our school days, in which we sit down to regular meals of intellectual diet, but that we must eat every day in order to live every day. That knowledge and what is known as learning are not to be confounded. Learning may still be an available store when it is not knowledge, but by knowledge one grows, becomes more of a person, and that is all that there is to show for it. We sometimes wonder at the simplicity and modesty of persons whose knowledge is matter of repute. But they are not hiding their light. They are not aware of any unusual possessions. They have nothing to show but themselves. But we feel the force of their personalities. Now, forceful personalities, persons of weight and integrity, of decision and sound judgment, are what the country is most in need of. And if we propose to bring such persons up for the public service, the gradual inception of knowledge is one condition amongst others. There are various delightfully new educational systems in favor, in all of which a grain of knowledge is presented in a gallon of warm diluent. We have the theory that it does not matter what a child learns, but only how he learns it, which is as sound as it does not matter what a child eats, but only how he eats it. Therefore, feed him on sawdust. Then we have Rousseau's primitive man theory, that a child must get all his knowledge through his own senses and by his own wits, as if there were no knowledge waiting to be passed on by the small torch-bearer. And there is the theory which obtained in Catholic England, exemplified in more than one of the Waverley novels, in The Sports Purveyed for Her Tenantry by Lady Margaret Bellenden, for example. Those men and maidens had been trained as children to be supple, active, healthy, with senses alert, ready for dance and song, with an eye and ear ready for the beautiful, intelligent, happy, capable. I quote from a valuable letter in The Times. What with our Morris dances, pageants, living pictures, miracle plays, and so on, we are reviving the Stewart educational ideals, and no doubt we will do well to aim at increasing the general joy. But our age requires more of us, in the sort of self-activity and self-expression implied in these and in half a dozen other educational theories. Knowledge plays no part, and the city gammon exhibits in perfection every quality of gaiety, alert intelligence, delight in shows which we set ourselves to cultivate. With all thy getting, get understanding, is the message for our needs, and understanding is, in one sense, the conscious act of the mind in apprehending knowledge, which is in fact relative, and does not exist for any person until that person's mind acts upon the intellectual matter presented to it. Why will ye not understand? Is repeated in poignant question of the Gospels. That is what ails us as a nation. We do not understand. Not ignorant persons only, but educated men and women employ fallacious arguments, offer prejudices for principles, and platitudes for ideas. If it be argued that these failures are due less to ignorance than to insincerity, I should reply that insincerity is an outcome of ignorance. The darkened intelligence cannot see clearly. The day is unto them that know, but knowledge is by no means the facile acquirement of those who, according to Ruskin, cram to pass and not to know. I would not be understood as passing strictures upon the vast and excellent educational work nearly all teachers are doing. It is impossible to go into an elementary school without being impressed by the competence of the teachers and the intelligence of the children. I have already paid a worthless tribute to public schools, and should like here to add a word of affectionate and hearty appreciation of the high school girl as I know her, thoughtful and well-educated, a person quite undeserving of the slings and arrows of outrageous criticism too freely aimed at her. As for our new universities, they remove the stigma unto which many of us have suffered in presence of the numerous centers of intellectual life, which add dignity and grace to continental cities. The new universities are full of promise for the land. We have, no doubt, arrived at a good starting place. We may not consider that the journey is accomplished. I need not repeat the charges to which we have laid ourselves open because of our ignorance, but I shall endeavor to take a closer survey of the field of education as regarded from the standpoint of knowledge and the innate affinities existing in the mind with that knowledge, which is proper for it. For the present, the need is that abstract knowledge should present itself to practical persons as the crying demand of the nation. The mandate, let us say, pronounced by certain general failures to understand the science of relations, and that other neglected form of knowledge, the science of the proportion of things. End of section 27. Section 28 of Home Education Series Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series Volume 6, Towards a Philosophy of Education, by Charlotte Mason. The Basis of National Strength, a Liberal Education from a National Standpoint, 5. Education and the Fullness of Time. I must live my life, said the notorious bandit who before the war terrorized Paris. And we have heard this sort of cant often, even before the doll's house gave to self-expression the dignity of a cult. Nevertheless, the brigand Bonnot, has done an ill turn to society, for a misguiding theory, neatly put, is more dangerous than an ill example. We are tired of the man who claims to live his life at the general expense, of the girl who will live hers to her family's annoyance or distress. But there really is a great opportunity open to the nation which will set itself to consider what the life of a man should be, and will give each individual a chance to live his life. We are doing something. We are trying to open the book of nature to children by the proper key. Knowledge, acquaintance by look and name, if not more, with bird and flower and tree. We see, too, that the magic of poetry makes knowledge vital, and children and grown-ups quote a verse which shall add blackness to the ash bud, tender wonder to that flower in the granite wall, a thrill to the song of the lark. As for the numerous field clubs of the northern towns, the members of which, weavers, miners, artisans, reveal themselves as accomplished botanists, birdmen, geologists, their Saturday rambles mean not only life, but splendid joy. It is to be hoped that the opportunities afforded in the schools will prepare women to take more part in these excursions. At present the work done is too thorough for their endurance and for their slight attainments. In another direction we are doing well. We are so made that every dynamic relation, be it leapfrog or high-flying, which we establish with Mother Earth, is a cause of joy. We begin to see this and are encouraging swimming, dancing, hockey, and so on, all instruments of present joy and permanent health. Again, we know that the human hand is a wonderful and exquisite instrument to be used in 100 movements exacting delicacy, direction, and force. Every such movement is a cause of joy as it leads to the pleasure of execution and the triumph of success. We begin to understand this and make some efforts to train the young in the deft handling of tools and the practice of handicrafts. Some day, perhaps, we shall see apprenticeship to trades revived, and good and beautiful work enforced. Insofar, we are laying ourselves out to secure that each shall live his life, and that not at his neighbor's expense. Because so wonderful is the economy of the world that when a man really lives his life, he benefits his neighbor as well as himself. We all thrive in the well-being of each. We are perceiving, too, that a human being is endowed with an ear attuned to harmony and melody, with a voice from which music may issue, hands whose delicate action may draw forth sounds in enthralling sequence. With the ancient Greeks, we begin to realize that music is a necessary part of education. So, too, of pictorial art. At last we understand that everyone can draw, and that, because to draw is delightful, everyone should be taught how, that everyone delights in pictures, and that education is concerned to teach him what pictures to delight in. A person may sing and dance, enjoy music and natural beauty, sketch what he sees, have satisfaction in his own good craftsmanship, labor with his hands at honest work, perceiving that work is better than wages, may live his life in various directions, the more the merrier. A certain pleasant play of the intellect attends the doing of all these things. His mind is agreeably exercised. He thinks upon what he is doing, often with excitement, sometimes with enthusiasm. He says, I must live my life, and he lives it in as many of these ways as are open to him. No other life is impoverished to supply his fullness, but, on the contrary, the sum of general joy and well-being is increased, both through sympathy and by imitation. This is the sort of ideal that is obtaining in our schools and in the public mind, so that the next generation bid fair to be provided with many ways of living their lives, ways which do not encroach upon the lives of others. Here is the contribution of our generation to the science of education, and it is not an unworthy one. We perceive that a person is to be brought up in the first place for his own uses, and after that for the uses of society. But, as a matter of fact, the person who lives his life most completely is also of most service to others because he contains within himself provision for many serviceable activities which are employed in living his life. And besides, there is a negative advantage to the community in the fact that the man is able to live on his own resources. But a man is not made up of only eyes to see, a heart to enjoy, limbs delightful in the using. He is satisfied with perfect execution. Life in all these kinds is open more or less to all but the idly depraved. But what of man's eager, hungry, restless, insatiable mind? True, we teach him the mechanical art of reading while he is at school, but we do not teach him to read. He has little power of attention, a poor vocabulary, little habit of conceiving any life but his own. To add to the gate money at a football match is his notion of adventure and diversion. We are, in fact, only taking count of the purlieus of that vast domain which pertains to every man in right of his human nature. We neglect mind. We need not consider brain. A duly nourished and duly exercised mind takes care of its physical organ, provided that organ also receives its proper material nourishment. But our fault, our exceeding great fault, is that we keep our own minds and the minds of our children shamefully underfed. The mind is a spiritual octopus, reaching out limbs in every direction to draw in enormous rations of that which, under the action of the mind itself, becomes knowledge. Nothing can steal its infinite variety. The heavens and the earth, the past, the present, and future, things great and things minute, nations and men, the universe, all are within the scope of the human intelligence. But there would appear to be, as we have seen, an unsuspected, unwritten law concerning the nature of the material, which is converted into knowledge during the act of apprehension. The idea of the logos did not come by chance to the later Greeks. The word is not a meaningless title applied to the second person of the Trinity. It is not without significance that every utterance which fell from him is marked by exquisite literary fitness. A child's comment on a hymn that was read to her was, "That is not poetry. Jesus would have said it much better." In rendering an account of his august commission, Christ said, "I have given unto them the words which thou gavest me." And one disciple voiced the rest when he said, "Thou hast the words of eternal life." The Greeks knew better than we that words are more than things, more than events. With all primitive people, rhetoric appears to have been a power. The grandiose sayings which we have scorned as inventions are coming to their own again, because what modern is capable of such inventions? Men move the world, but the motives which move men are conveyed by words. Now a person is limited by the number of things he is able to call by their names, qualify by appropriate epithets. This is no mere pedantic ruling. It belongs to that unfathomable mystery we call human nature. And the modern notion of education, with its shibboleth of things not words, is intrinsically demoralizing. The human intelligence demands letters, literature, with a more than bread hunger. It is almost within living memory how the newly emancipated American Negroes fell upon books as the famished Israelites fell upon food in the deserted camp of Sennacherib. Only as he has been and is nourished upon books is a man able to live his life. A great deal of mechanical labor is necessarily performed in solitude. The miner, the farm laborer, cannot think all the time of the block he is hewing, the furrow he is plowing. How good that he should be figuring to himself the trial scene in the heart of Midlothian, the hijinks in Guy Mannering, that his imagination should be playing with Anne Page or Mrs. Quickly, or that his labor goes the better because his secret soul, holy strain, repeats. People, working people, do these things. Many a one can say out of a rich experience, my mind to me a kingdom is. Many a one cries with Browning's Paracelsus, God, thou art mind. Unto the master mind, mind should be precious. Spare my mind alone. We know how have mind appears on the tiles paving the choir of St. Cross. But mind, like body, must have its meat. Faith has grown feeble in these days. Hope faints in our heavy ways. But charity waxes strong. We would make all men millionaires if we could, or at any rate, take from the millionaires to give to the multitude. No doubt some beneficent and venturous Robin Hood of a minister will arise, has arisen, to take steps in that direction. But when all has been done in the way of social amelioration, we shall not have enabled men to live their lives, unless we have given them a literary education of such sort that they choose to continue in the pleasant places of the mind. That is all very well in theory, someone objects. But look at the masses. Are they able to receive letters? When they talk, it is in journalese, and anything in the nature of a book must be watered down and padded to suit their comprehension. But is it not true that working men talk in journalese? Because it is only the newspapers that do them the grace to meet them frankly on their own level. Neither school education nor life has put books in their way, and their adoption of the only literary speech that offers but proves a natural aptitude for letters. One cannot always avoid appeal to the authority one knows to be final, and I will not apologize for citing the fact at which, no doubt we have all wondered that Christ should expose the profoundest philosophy to the multitude, the many, whom even Socrates contemns. May I quote, with apologies to the writer, a letter signed A Working Man, written in answer to one of mine, which was honored by being reprinted in the Times weekly edition. It is good, by the way, that such a journal should be in the hands of working men. My correspondent thanks heaven that there are still a few persons left in this country who regard education as somewhat different from a means of keeping a shop. We may all thank heaven that there are working men who value knowledge for its own sake and hate to have it presented to them as a means of getting on. The fact is, letters make a universal appeal because they respond to certain innate affinities. Young Tennysons, De Quincys, and the like are, as we all know, inordinate readers, but these are capable of foraging on their own account. It is for the average, the dull, and the backward boy I would lay urgent claim to a literary education. The minds of such as these respond to this and to no other appeal, and they turn out perfectly intelligent persons, open to knowledge by many avenues. For working men whose intelligence is in excess of their education, letters are the accessible vehicle of knowledge. Having learned the elements of reading, writing, and summing, it is unnecessary to trouble them with any other beggarly elements. Their natural intelligence and mature minds make them capable of dealing with difficulties as they occur. And for further elucidation, every working man's club should have an encyclopedia. Some men naturally take to learning and will struggle manfully with their Latin grammar and Cicero, their Euclid and trigonometry. Happy they! But the general conclusion remains that for men and women of all ages, all classes, and all complexions of mind, letters are an imperative and daily requirement to satisfy that universal mind hunger, the neglect of which gives rise to emotional disturbances, and, as a consequence, to evils that dismay us. End of section 28.
Section 29 of Home Education Series, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marie Christian. Home Education Series, Volume 6. Towards a Philosophy of Education by Charlotte Mason. The Basis of National Strength. A Liberal Education from a National Standpoint. 6. Knowledge in Literary Form. I have so far urged that knowledge is necessary to men, and that, in the initial stages, it must be conveyed through a literary medium, whether it be knowledge of physics or of letters, because there would seem to be some inherent quality in mind which prepares it to respond to this form of appeal, and no other. I say in the initial stages, because possibly, when the mind becomes conversant with knowledge of a given type, it unconsciously translates the driest formula into living speech. Perhaps it is for some such reason that mathematics seems to fall outside this rule of literary presentation. Mathematics, like music, is a speech in itself, a speech irrefragably logical, of exquisite clarity, meeting the requirements of mind. To consider letters as the staple of education is no new thing, nor is the suggestion new that to turn a young person into a library is to educate him. But here we are brought to a stand. The mind demands method, orderly presentation, as inevitably as it demands knowledge. And it may be that our educational misadventures are due to the fact that we have allowed ourselves to take up any haphazard ordering that is recommended with sufficient pertinacity. But no one can live without a philosophy which points out the order, means and end of effort, intellectual or other. To fail in discovering this is to fall into melancholia, or more active madness. So we go about picking up a maxim here, a motto there, an idea elsewhere, and make a patchwork of the whole, which we call our principles. Beggarly fragments enough we piece together to cover our nakedness, and 100 phrases which one may hear any day betray lives founded upon an ignoble philosophy. No doubt people are better than their words, better than their own thoughts. We speak of ourselves as finite beings, but is there any limit to the generosity and nobility of almost any person? The hastily spoken, "It is the rule at sea," that distressed us a while ago, what a vista does it disclose of chivalric tenderness, entire self-sacrifice. Human nature has not failed. What has failed us is philosophy, and that applied philosophy which is called education. Philosophy, all the philosophies, old and new, land us on the horns of a dilemma. Either we do well by ourselves and seek our own perfection of nature or condition, or we do well by others to our own loss or deterioration. If there is a mean, philosophy does not declare it. There are things of which we have desperate need. We want a new scale of values. I suppose we all felt when, in those days before the war, we read how several millionaires went down in the Titanic disaster, not only that their millions did not matter, but that they did not matter to them, that possibly they felt themselves well quit of an incessant fatigue. We want more life. There is not life enough for our living. We have no great engrossing interests. We hasten from one engagement to another and glance furtively at the clock to see how time, life, is getting on. We triumph if a week seems to have passed quickly. Who knows but that the approach of an inevitable end might find us glad to get it all over? We want hope. We busy ourselves excitedly about some object of desire, but the pleasure we get is in effort, not in attainment. And we read before the war of the number of suicides among continental schoolboys, for instance, with secret understanding. What is there to live for? We want to be governed. Servants like to receive their orders. Soldiers and schoolboys enjoy discipline. There is satisfaction in stringent court etiquette. The fact of being under orders adds dignity to character. When we revolt, it is only that we may transfer our allegiance. We want a new start. We are sick of ourselves and of knowing in advance how we shall behave and how we shall feel on all occasions. The change we half unconsciously desire is to other aims, other ways of looking at things. We feel that we are more than there is room for. Other conditions might give us room. We don't know. Anyway, we are uneasy. These are 2 or 3 of the secret matters that oppress us, and we are in need of a philosophy which shall deal with such things of the spirit. We believe we should be able to rise to its demands, however exigent. For the failure is not in us or in human nature so much as in our limited knowledge of conditions. The cry of decadence is dispiriting, but is it well founded? The beautiful little gowns that have come down as heirlooms would not fit the divinely tall daughters of many a house where they are treasured. We have become frank, truthful, kind. Our conscientiousness and our charity are morbid. We cannot rest in our beds for a disproportionate anxiety for the well-being of everybody. We even exceed the generous hazard that, peradventure for a good man, one might be found to die. Almost any man will risk his life for the perishing without question of good or bad. And we expect no less from firemen, doctors, lifeboatmen, parsons, the general public. And what a comment on the splendid magnanimity of men does the war afford! An annoying inquiry concerning risks at sea almost resulted in a ruling that no one should let himself be saved so long as others were in danger. It is preposterous, but is what human nature expects of itself. No, we are not decadent on the whole, and our uneasiness is perhaps caused by growing pains. We may be poor things, but we are ready to break forth into singing should the chance open to us of a full life of passionate devotion. Now, all our exigent demands are met by words written in a book, and by the manifestations of a person. And we are waiting for a Christianity such as the world has not yet known. Hitherto, Christ has existed for our uses. But what if a time were coming when we also should taste the oriental fragrance of my Master? So it shall be when the shout of a king is among us, and are there not premonitions? But these things come not by prayer and fasting, by good works and self-denial alone. There is something prior to all these upon which our Master insists with distressful urgency. Why will ye not know? Why will ye not understand? My excuse for touching upon our most intimate concerns is that this matter, too, belongs to the domain of letters. If we propose to seek knowledge, we must proceed in an orderly way, recognizing that the principal knowledge is of most importance. The present writer writes and the reader reads, because we are all moved by the spirit of our time. These things are our secret preoccupation, for we have come out of a long alienation as persons, wearied with trifles, and are ready and anxious for a new age. We know the way, and we know where to find our rule of the road. But we must bring a new zeal and a new method to our studies. We may no longer dip here and there or read a perfunctory chapter with a view to find some word of counsel or comfort for our use. We are engaged in the study of, in noting the development of, that consummate philosophy which meets every occasion of our lives, all demands of the intellect, every uneasiness of the soul. The arrogance which pronounces judgment upon the written word, upon so slight an acquaintance as would hardly enable us to cover a sheet or two of paper with sayings of the Master, which confines the divine teaching to the great sermon, of which we are able to rehearse some half-dozen sentences, is as absurd as it is blameworthy. Let us give at least as profound attention to the teaching of Christ as the disciples of Plato say, gave to his words of wisdom. Let us observe, notebook in hand, the orderly and progressive sequence, the penetrating quality, the irresistible appeal, the unique content of the divine teaching. For this purpose, it might be well to use some one of the approximately chronological arrangements of the gospel history in the words of the text. Let us read not for our profiting, though that will come, but for love of that knowledge which is better than thousands of gold and silver. By and by we perceive that this knowledge is the chief thing in life. The meaning of Christ's saying, "Behold, I make all things new," dawns upon us. We get new ideas as to the relative worth of things. New vigor, new joy, new hope are ours. If we believe that knowledge is the principal thing, that knowledge is tripartite, and that the fundamental knowledge is the knowledge of God, we shall bring up our children as students of divinity, and shall pursue our own lifelong studies in the same school. Then we shall find that the weekly sermons for which we are prepared are as bread to the hungry, and we shall perhaps understand how enormous is the demand we make upon the clergy for living original thought. It is only as we are initiated that science and nature come to our aid in this chief pursuit. Then they their great original proclaim, but while we are ignorant of the principal knowledge, they remain dumb. Literature and history have always great matters to speak of or suggest, because they deal with states or phases of moral government and moral anarchy, and tacitly indicate to us the sole key to all this unintelligible world. And literature not only reveals to us the deepest things of the human spirit, but it is profitable also, for example of life and instruction in manners. We are at the parting of the ways. Our latest educational authority, one who knows and loves little children, would away with all tales and histories that appeal to the imagination. Let children learn by means of things is her mandate, and the charm and tenderness with which it is delivered may well blind us to its desolating character. We recognize Rousseau, of course, and his Emile, that self-sufficient person who should know nothing of the past, should see no visions, allow no authority. But human nature in children is stronger than the 18th century philosopher and the theories which he continues to inform. Whoever has told a fairy tale to a child has been made aware of that natural appetency for letters to which it is our business to minister. Are we not able to believe that words are more than meat? And, so believing, shall we not rise up and insist that children shall have a liberal diet of the spirit? Rousseau, in spite of false analogies, fallacious arguments, was able to summon fashionable mothers and men of the world throughout Europe to the great task of education, because his eloquence convinced them that this was their assigned work and a work capable of achievement. And we who perhaps see with clearer eyes should do well to cherish this legacy, the conviction that the education of the succeeding generation is the chief business of every age. Nevertheless, though we are ourselves emerging from the slough of materialism, we are willing to plunge children into its heavy ways through the agency of a practical and useful education. But children have their rights, and among these is the freedom of the city of mind. Let them use things, know things, learn through things, by all means. But the more they know letters, the better they will be able, with due instruction, to handle things. I do not hesitate to say that the whole of a child's instruction should be conveyed through the best literary medium available. His history book should be written with the lucidity, concentration, personal conviction, directness, and admirable simplicity which characterizes a work of literary caliber. So should his geography books. The so-called scientific method of teaching geography, now in vogue, is calculated to place a child in a somewhat priggish relation to Mother Earth. It is impossible, too, that the human intelligence should assimilate the sentences one meets with in many books for children, but the memory retains them and the child is put in the false attitude of one who offers pseudo-knowledge. Most of the geography books, for example, require to be translated into terms of literature before they can be apprehended. Great confidence is placed in diagrammatic and pictorial representation, and it is true that children enjoy diagrams and understand them as they enjoy and understand puzzles, but there is apt to be in their minds a great gulf between the diagram and the fact it illustrates. We trust much to pictures, lantern slides, cinematograph displays, but without labor there is no profit, and probably the pictures which remain with us are those which we have first conceived through the medium of words. Pictures may help us to correct our notions, but the imagination does not work upon a visual presentation. We lay the phrases of a description on our palette and make our own pictures. Works of art belong to another category. We recollect how Dr. Arnold was uneasy until he got details enough to form a mental picture of a place new to him. So it is with children and all persons of original mind. A map to put the place in position, and then, all about it, is what we want. Readings in literature, whether of prose or poetry, should generally illustrate the historical period studied. But selection should be avoided. Children should read the whole book or the whole poem to which they are introduced. Here we are confronted by a serious difficulty. Plato, we know, determined that the poets in his Republic should be well looked after lest they should write matter to corrupt the morals of youth. Aware of what happened in Europe when the floodgates of knowledge were opened, Erasmus was anxiously solicitous on this score. And it is a little surprising to find that here, Rossetti was on the side of the angels. Will the publishers, who, since Friedrich Perthes discovered their educational mission, have done so much for the world, help us in this matter also? They must excise with a most sparing hand, always under the guidance of a jealous scholar. But what an ease of conscience it would be to teachers if they could throw open the world of books to their scholars without fear of the mental and moral smudge left by a single prurient passage. Many, too, who have taken out their freedom in the Republic of Letters would be well content to keep complete library editions in costly bindings in their proper place, while handy volumes in daily use might be left about without uneasiness. The Old Testament itself, after such a very guarded process, would be more available for the reading of children, and few persons would feel that Shakespeare's plays suffered from the removal of obscenities here and there. In this regard we cherish a too superstitious piety. In another matter, let that great remedial thinker, Dr. Arnold, advise us. Adjust your proposed amount of reading to your time and inclination, but whether that amount be large or small, let it be varied in its kind, and widely varied. If I have a confident opinion on any one point connected with the improvement of the human mind, it is on this. Here we get support for a varied and liberal curriculum, and as a matter of fact, we find that the pupil who studies a number of subjects knows them as well as he who studies a few knows those few. Children should read books not about books and about authors. This sort of reading may be left for the spare hours of the dilettante. Their reading should be carefully ordered, for the most part in historical sequence. They should read to know, whether it be Robinson Crusoe or Huxley's Physiography. Their knowledge should be tested not by questions, but by the oral, and occasionally the written, reproduction of a passage after one reading. All further processes that we concern ourselves about in teaching, the mind performs for itself. And lastly, this sort of reading should be the chief business in the classroom. We are at a crucial moment in the history of English education. John Bull is ruminating. He says, "I have labored at the higher education of women. Let them back to the cooking pot and distaff and learn the science of domestic economy. I have tried for these 40 years to educate the children of the people. What is the result? Strikes and swelled head. Let them have prentice schools and learn what will be their business in life." John Bull is wrong. Insofar as we have failed, it is that we have offered the pedantry, the more verbiage, of knowledge in lieu of knowledge itself. And it is time for all who do not hold knowledge in contempt to be up and doing. There is time yet to save England and to make of her a greater nation, more worthy of her opportunities. But the country of our love will not stand still. If we let the people sink into the mire of a material education, our doom is sealed. Eyes now living will see us take even a third-rate place among the nations, for it is knowledge that exalteth a nation, because out of duly ordered knowledge proceedeth righteousness, and prosperity ensueth. Think clear, feel deep, bear fruit well, says our once familiar mentor, Matthew Arnold, and his monition exactly meets our needs. End of section 29.
Section 30 of Home Education Series, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brooke Favorite, AlongsideMom.com. Home Education Series, Volume 6, Towards a Philosophy of Education by Charlotte Mason. Section 30, Too Wide a Mesh. Supplementary, Too Wide a Mesh. The wide world, dreaming on things to come, is concentrating on a luminous figure of education which it beholds, dimly, emerging from a cloudy horizon. This gracious presence is to change the world, to give to all men wider possibilities, other thoughts, aims. But alas, this education which is to be open to all promises no more a nearer view than to make opportunity universal. That is, in spiritual things, he may take who has the power, and he may keep who can. The net is cast wide, no doubt, and brings in a mighty haul, but the meshes are so wide that it will only retain big fishes. Now, this is the history of education since the world was and is no new thing. The medieval schools of castle or abbey, the Renaissance schools, the very schools of China, have all been conducted upon this plan. Education is for him who wants it and can take it, but is no universal boon like the air we breathe or the sunshine we revel in. We are a little sorry for the effect of this limitation upon the working classes. Only a small percentage of the children of these are big enough to be retained in the examination net, which, to do it justice, explores all waters. A few of the past men may do big things and fill big posts, but for the rest, a large percentage is, in practice, illiterate except for the spelling out of a local rag for football and parish news. But is the mischief confined to what we call the working classes? Is it not a fact that in most schools the full force of instruction is turned on upon a few boys who are likely to distinguish themselves? While for the rest of the school teaching is duly given, no doubt, but the boys find they may take it or leave it as the humor takes them. We were all fascinated a while ago by the story of a pair of charming twins. These went through the usual preparatory school education and then passed on to a great public school, where they remained until they were 19. That is, they had 10 or 12 good years among most excellent opportunities. As they were attractive boys, we may take it that their masters were not at any rate unwilling to teach them. Their record should have been quite a good one, and though it is the fashion to sneer a little at public schools, we know that these have turned out and do turn out the best and most intellectual men the country has occasion for. Therefore, what happened in the case of these twins does not cast any reflection upon public schools, but solely upon the system of the big mesh. Here are some of the things we read in that delightful biography. While in hospital after a mash at polo, R. wrote to F., "I enjoyed it immensely. What lucky people we are taking an interest in so many things." Surely, here was material for a schoolmaster to work upon. Again, we read, They never ceased to wonder at the magnificence of the world, and they carried a divine innocence into soldiering and travel and sport and business, and not least, into the shadows of the Great War. And this wonder of theirs was the note that marked them at school. Again, what material for their instructors! But, we read, at X they showed little interest in books, and later were wont to lament to each other that they had left school wholly uneducated. The italics are ours. Their kindly biographer and dear friend goes on to say, but they learnt other things, the gift of leadership, for instance, and the power of getting alongside all varieties of human nature. But was not this nature rather than nurture, school nurture at any rate, for these gifts seem to have been a family inheritance. Born in 1880, they left school in 1899, where there follows a delightful record for the one brother of successful and adventurous sport, while R was soon absorbed in the city, and beginning to lament his want of education. F, while in Egypt, was greatly impressed by Lord Cromer, and writes to R, "He is quite the biggest man we have. To hear him talk is worth hearing." The two brothers correspond constantly, and R takes the part of mentor to his brother. He advises him to learn the Times leaders by heart and to improve his style, because they are very good English. Again, "I will send you out next mail a very good book, Science and Education, by Professor Huxley, which I have marked in several places, the sort of book you can read over again." R had discovered that he was very badly educated and was determined to remedy this defect. It don't matter, I do believe, not having learned at X, so long as one does so now. See the fine loyalty of the young man. His failures were not to be put down to his school. If the schools take credit for any one thing, it is that they show their pupils how to learn. But do they? We are told that R set to work at a queer assortment of books and writes to F, "Anyone can improve his memory. The best way is by learning by heart, no matter what. And then when you think you know it, say it or write it. After 2 or 3 days you are sure to forget it again, and then instead of looking at the book, strain your mind and try to remember it. Above all things, always keep your mind employed. One great man, I forget which, used to see a number on a door, say 69, and tried to remember all that had happened in the years ending in 69. Or see a horse and remember how many you have seen that day. Asquith always learns things by heart. He never wastes a minute. As soon as he has nothing to do, he picks up some book. He reads till 1:30 every night. When driving to the temple next morning, he thinks over what he has read. Result, he has a marvelous memory and knows everything. Think of the Herculean labors the poor fellow set for both himself and his brother. They ran an intellectual race across a plowed field after heavy rain, and the marvel is that they made way at all. Yet these two brothers had sufficient intellectual zeal to have made them great men as ambassadors, governors of dominions, statesmen, what not. Whereas, so far as things of the mind go, they spent their days in a hopeless struggle, alert for any indication which might help them to make up leeway. And all because, according to their own confession, they had learned nothing at school. Here are further indications of R's labor in the field of knowledge. I am reading Roseberry's Napoleon and will send it to you. What a wonder he was! Never spent a moment of his life without learning something. I enclose an essay from Bacon's book. Learn it by heart if you can. I have and think it a clinker. I have also finished Life of Macaulay. I have always wondered how our great politicians and literary chaps live. I also send you a Shakespeare. I learnt Antony's harangue to the Romans after Caesar's death. I am also trying to learn a little about electricity and railroad organization, so have my time filled up. Pickwick Papers I also send to you. I have always avoided this sort of books, but Dickens' works are miles funnier than the rotten novels one sees. I have learnt one thing by my reading and my conversation with professors. You and I go at a subject all wrong. Italics ours. These letters are pathetic documents, and that they are reassuring also, let us be thankful. They do go to prove that the desire of knowledge is inextinguishable, whatever schools do or leave undone. But have these nothing to answer for when a pursuit which should yield ever-recurring refreshment becomes dogged labor over heavy roads with little pleasure in progress? Here again is another evidence of the limitations attending an utter absence of education. A cultivated sense of humor is a great factor in a joyous life, but these young men are without it. Perhaps the youth addicted to sports usually fails to appreciate delicate nonsense. Sports are too strenuous to admit of a subtler, more airy kind of play, and we read, R. heard Mr. Balfour and Lord Ray praising Alice in Wonderland. Deeply impressed, he bought the book as soon as he returned to London and read it earnestly. To his horror, he saw no sense in it. Then it struck him that it might be meant as nonsense, and he had another try, when he concluded that it was rather funny, but he remained disappointed. We need not follow the career of these interesting men further. Both fell early before they were 40. Their fine qualities and their personal fascination remained with them to the end, as did also, alas, their invincible ignorance. They labored indefatigably, but as R. remarked, you and I go at a subject all wrong. The schools must tell us why men who attained mediocre successes and the personal favor due to charming manners and sweet natures were yet somewhat depressed and disappointed on account of the ignorance which they made blind and futile efforts to correct. But they never got so far as to learn that knowledge is delightful because one likes it, and that no effort at self-education can do anything until one has found out this supreme delightfulness of knowledge. It must be noted that this failure of a great school to fulfill its purpose occurred 20 years ago, and that no educational body has made more well-considered and enlightened advances than have the headmasters of the great public schools. Probably that delightful group of Eton boys in Coningsby has always been and is today typical. There is a certain knightly character in the fine bearing and intelligent countenances of the head boys one comes across there which speaks well for their intellectual activity. The question is whether more might not be done with the average boy. The function of the schools is no doubt to feed their scholars on knowledge until they have created in them a healthy appetite which they will go on satisfying for themselves day by day throughout life. We must give up the farce of teaching young people how to learn, which is just as felicitous a labor and just as necessary as to teach a child the motions of eating without offering him food. The studies which are pursued with a view to improve the mind must in future take a back seat. The multitudinous things that every person wants to know must be made accessible in the schoolroom, not by diagrams, digests, and abstract principles, but boys and girls, like Kit's little brother, must learn what oysters is by supping on oysters. There is absolutely no avenue to knowledge but knowledge itself, and the schools must begin, not by qualifying the mind to deal with knowledge, but by affording all the best books containing all the sorts of knowledge which these twins, like everyone else, wanted to know. We have to face two difficulties. We do not believe in children as intellectual persons, nor in knowledge as requisite and necessary for intellectual life. It is a pity that education is conducted in camera, save for the examination lists which shew how the best pupils in a school have acquitted themselves, the half-dozen or dozen best in a big school. Finely conscientious as teachers are, they can hardly fail to give undue importance to their group of candidates for examination, and a school of 400 or 500 stands or falls by a dozen head boys. End of Section 30. End of Home Education Series, Volume 6, Towards a Philosophy of Education by Charlotte Mason.